All right. We are nearing the end of chapter 17. What we were talking about in this chapter was the concept of karov elecha hadavar me'od beficha bevalcha la'asoto. And the discussion in this chapter has been, how in the heck can the Torah say that doing Torah mitzvot is easily, very, very easily achievable and attainable? We discussed the idea that when it says bilvavacha, the meaning doesn't mean in the normal sense that's this deep-seated love, but just that when you're able to do a little hitbonanut, a little thought process, and realize that what Hashem does and kind of motivates you to get everything done, and say, even if you don't put your whole heart and soul into it, even if it's not the love, the burning love, Hashem looks at it as if you've done exactly what you need to do, and he takes, we do our part, Hashem does the rest. And because that is fairly simple to do, which is going to be challenged in the next chapter, but not yet. What we have left in this chapter, we're in the middle of talking about, here we put on the screen, we're talking about, we were just talking about the Rishaim, the true Rishaim, who are wicked to the core, and that they're no longer able to control themselves, and their heart just rules them, and there's nothing they can do about it. And then it says, we're in the highlighted point here, it says, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to read, this is like, there's two parts here, this rest of this chapter. One that finishes off what we're talking about, one that kind of goes in a little bit different direction, which is coming up in a minute. The Torah does not, when Moshe Rabbeinu was saying, karov elecha, it's very close to you, it's very near for you to be able to do that. It's not dealing with metim shebechayehem kurim metim. That we have a concept in hashkafa, in Jewish thought. It's mentioned many times in Talmud that a rasha, when he is alive, is still considered dead because he doesn't do mitzvot, doesn't keep Torah's words. And tzaddikim, when they're dead, considered alive because their legacy lives on. So it says like this, that when Moshe said in the Torah, karov elecha davar me'od beficha v'chulei, he was not talking to those people who are considered dead, i.e. Rishaim. Ki be'emet i'efshar l'Rishaim l'hatchil lavod et Hashem. It's impossible for a Rasha to truly begin to serve Hashem. Belishi yasu tshuva al ha'avar tchila. The first step is they have to do tshuva. Wait a minute, you just told me that the Rasha is a person whose heart rules over him, and he's lost his self-control. So how does he even think to do tshuva? Showing us that even the Rasha Gomer, we talked about this before, there's still that little pintala yid, as they call it, in there, that someone how may get to. But the first thing, in order for a Rasha to be able to get to karov elecha, that it's easily achievable or very near to you, he has to first do tshuva. That's the first step. What does he have to do in this tshuva? The shabera klipot, he has to break the klipa, which we talked about in depth in the early part of the book. She masach mavdil u'chitza shel barzel hamafseket beinan laviyim shebashamayim. It's this iron curtain or wall that divides us between us and Hashem, the Shamayim. How does he achieve a form of tshuva in this case when he's so far gone? He has to be through his broken heart. He has to feel bitter inside of what he did. As it says in the pasuk, the Zohar tells us, what does it mean? What does that mean? A broken heart, says the Zohar, will break the ruach hatuma, or this spiritual impurity. And as he says, which is the sitra achra, this then will enable him, by doing so, to be like everybody else. That'll be karov elecha. And it mentions that it's found in Parshat Pinchas. Let me just see something. Go to the next slide. Okay, now I have to explain what this means. Before we continue, I want to show you something. Look at the Shem Hashem, Yud K Vav K. The letter Hey appears twice in Hashem's Yud K Vav K name, the Ado and Nai name of Hashem. There are two types of tshuva. Now, I will tell you that this next few lines that finish up this parak are much more of a Kabbalistic idea. I'm going to read and translate and explain a little drop of it to the best of my ability, and I'm going to go on. So he says like this: there are two types of tshuva one can do. One's called tshuva tata'a, which is a lower level tshuva, and one's called tshuva ila'a, a higher level tshuva. And I'm giving you again, I want to stress that what I'm saying now is the simplest form I can break it down to. This is a much deeper idea. Tshuva tata, lower level tshuva, what it does is when a person is a Rasha, what they in essence have done is, they have in a sense taken the hey of Yud K Vav K and sent it to Galut, into exile. It doesn't exist. All that left is Yud K and the Vav. The hey is gone. And what does tshuva tata do? It brings it back. Tshuva ila'a, on the other hand, when the person is so far gone, when even the first letter hey, again, this is a Kabbalistic concept here, which is, it might be hard to put your fingers on. A tshuva ila'a, the higher level tshuva, even reunites when he's so far gone that even the second hey is also missing, and all he's left with is a yud for his neshama to cling to. The tshuva ila'a will reunite that hey with the original yud and the vav and the hey. So it becomes the full name of Hashem once again. Now, how does that apply to us? Let's just take a look at this slide. Vehi bechinat tshuva tata. When a Rasha Gamur does the first step, his broken heart and wants to reconnect with Hashem, it is the lower level tshuva, lehalot hey tata. What does it do? It raises up that first hey. Lahakima minifilata. It raises it up from its falling off. Shenafla lechitzonit shehu sod galut hashchina. That ki'ilu, like I said, that hey of the Yud Kei Vav Kei, the second hey, went into galut, into exile. Spiritually, we're talking. Talmud Chazal, as the Chazal told us, galut ledom shchina imahem. When the Jews went into galut, the shchina went with them. Dahainu, it means kishadam ose ma'aseh Edom. When a person acts like the people of Edom, morid umamshich l'shem bechinat v'nitzotz elokut hamechayet naran shalo hamlubashim bo b'nefesh ha'beima be'aklipa shebelibo shebachalal ha'smalit hamolechet bo be'odo rasha. Meaning, in very loose translation, that when a person does acts of Edom, meaning they act like the despicable things that people of Edom did, and they lose this spark of connection to Hashem, not completely, because you can never lose that. And the way it affects is Naran, Neshama, Ruach, and Nefesh, Ruach, Neshama, that are now completely enrobed and clothed in this Nefesh HaBahamit, and this Klipa is there, this intervening substance is there, and it has blocked and is basically the left side of his heart, which we said is the source of all evil, is completely there. It's ruling over him. And the Irktana, then what happens? Let's move this down just a little bit. Then Kvushim Begola Etzla. What happens here? Then when he does all this, so this is, notice the state he's in is this broken state. The connection to God is broken. The hey, he's affected. Hashem's Ki'ilu Hashem, the hey of Hashem's name has gone into Galut. And when his heart does break in tshuva to try to return to Hashem, then he's able to be karov again to Hashem. The karov karov meod. V'nishbara ruach hatuma v'sitra acha v'yitpadu. Again, this last few lines here is telling us as follows. Again, in more of a Kabbalistic approach, that we think in terms of physical. Like I do something wrong. Let's say this is something let's say this is wine that's not kosher. I've already made a bracha, by the way. I decided to drink it, and I couldn't care less anymore. I've thrown away my Judaism. I've thrown away everything. I've gone all the way. I'm completely disconnected. Obviously, we know we're still connected to Hashem. But what I've done is I've gone into galut, I've gone into a self-imposed exile, and then I've taken that letter hey, that second letter of Hashem's name, gotten rid of it by doing tshuva, and it means that I cannot at that point when it says karov elecha davar me'od, that it's exceedingly achievable, doesn't apply to me anymore. When I have a broken spirit and a broken heart, and I want to do tshuva, that hey comes back. And now, once again, that since it's closed, it's connected again. Now it's karov elecha me'od. Once again, doesn't mean you're going to be able to achieve the heights, but it means like a Benoni will be able to do, and in order to get close to Hashem, just through the desire to want to get close to Hashem. by the heat bonanut, by the little bit of focus and concentration of what you know needs to be done. Now, what I want to show you, let's get this up. Oh, wait, share with sound. Share. Is this control? Control.
Welcome back to Tanya in 5. The last few days we've been studying chapter.
You can hear it, yes? Okay, good. Let's continue. Let me get back to here. Sorry.
Chapter 17. Having come to an understanding of who the Beinoni is, and the expectation and hope that each and one of us strive and fight to attain this level of Beinoni.
How did this happen? It looks weird. Okay, sorry, whatever. Okay, let's just continue.
The Alter Rebbe now returns to something that he began with on the title page, something we discussed in the second video on this series. Namely, there he quoted a verse which reads in Hebrew, Ki karov elecha hadavar ma'od beficha uvolvavcha lasosai. For the matter, the observance of Torah and mitzvot, is very near to each of us, in our mouth, in our heart, to get it done. And there the Alter Rebbe told us that the objective of the book Tanya is to provide a roadmap to indeed achieve that, to be able to get to the point where we can serve God completely and fully in our mouth and in our heart to get it done. So now let's analyze the verse, having gone through the last 16 chapters. The verse says that there are 3 things that are attainable to us: in our mouth, in our heart, to get it done. So the first and the third item, in our mouth, to get it done, has been kind of covered in chapter 12, 13, and 14.
Right. This is driving me nuts. I'm sorry. 1 second. I want to get it the right way here. Go back to this. Go to here and try once again.
There, we discussed this idea that every person is capable of discipline and self-control. At any moment, I can decide, do I want to say that or not say that? Do I want to violate the code of Jewish law, or do I want to follow the code of Jewish law? So that's been covered, that the Beinoni and everybody is capable of implementing thought, speech, and action in perfect accord with the way the code of Jewish law wants, and exercising the innate capacity that I have for self-control. Or in the language of Tanya, the mind controls the heart. I really don't want to do that, but I'm going to do it anyway. I really do want to do that, but I'm going to control myself and not do it. Okay. But what about item number 2 in the verse? In the heart. Right? The verse says, it's near to you to serve God in your mouth and in your heart to get it done. So what about the heart? What's the expectation of nearness to serve God with my heart? So, says the Alter Rebbe, this is covered by that which we explained in chapter 16. In chapter 16, we explained that even if a person cannot get full-on emotional attachment to God, where he falls in love with God, but if he pushes his mind to understand the beauty of God as much as he can, and then he comes to the conclusion, I ought to feel for God. I don't, but I ought to. And then he makes a decision, I'm going to behave in accord with this conclusion of how I ought to feel. I ought to feel attached to God. I ought to feel that my entire life is dedicated to Him, and therefore I'm going to act that way. And the Alter Rebbe told us in chapter 16 that that is something that God considers to be full attachment to Him, even though I don't feel it emotionally. Now says the Alter Rebbe, look closely at the verse, and you will see that the verse is talking about that kind of attachment. The verse is not talking about full-blown emotion. It's not talking about someone who feels full-on love and attachment for God. It's talking about somebody who feels motivated enough to behave for God because they understand that they ought to love. The words in the verse are, in your mouth, in your heart, to get it done. In your heart, to get it done. So what kind of heart is the Torah expecting here? What's the expectation? What kind of heart is it? It's the heart that is fired up enough to get it done. It's not talking about a heart where just I feel for God in and of itself. It's talking about the kind of feelings that's enough to motivate behavior. What kind of feeling is that? It's the conclusion that I've come to in my mind that says I ought to feel, and because I ought to feel, I make a strong resolution and I'm going to behave in accordance with that. And that is indeed something that's attainable for everybody. Because every person, with the exception of very few people who have lost complete control of their mind and are incapable of, choosing what they want to think about, that person has to go through a process of teshuvah, which is discussed at length in part 3 of Tanya. But excluding that person, everybody is capable of deciding, what do I want to think about? And if I decide I want to think about and contemplate the greatness of God, I will surely come to the conclusion that I ought to love Him. And then I can take that conclusion, I ought to love Him, and make that become the heart to get it done. Make that the motivation for behavior. The takeaway from all of this is that I should never underestimate the capacity of the choices I have. I have the choice for self-control at any time. And I have the choice to decide what are the things I want to contemplate. What are the things I want to take up my headspace? And if I decide that godliness and His beauty is what's going to take up the space in my head, then I'm surely going to come to the conclusion of motivated action. Looking forward to seeing you when we conclude chapter 18.
Okay. Oh, that's all I had to do. Okay. Okay, I see what I could have done to fix that. Sorry. These little things make me crazy. What can I say? Okay. This now that we finished chapter 17, we have finished a certain section of Tanya. When we first started Tanya, after the introduction, the historical introduction, I mentioned to you that Tanya is broken down. It doesn't look like necessarily just reading through it. It's broken down in certain chunks. And we just finished the first 17 chapters. I'm gonna give you a little review of the chapters just for a couple of minutes. And then just a brief introduction to chapter 18 through 25, because 18 through 25 is another section. The first 8 chapters of Tanya is where we lay down, the Admor HaZaken, the Baal Tanya, laid down the foundation and gave us definitions such as klipa, gimel klipot hatmeot. We talked about nefesh bahamit, nefesh my mind just went elokit. Wow, that was great. We talked about the definitions that would, and also laid down many questions that we have started to answer since the beginning. Chapter 9, we began to discuss the different types of people, tzadikim, rishaim, and then onto benoni. That's 9 through 11. And how the battle is done and waged between the tzadik and the nefesh bahamit, which we said there is none, which applies to maybe a few people on planet Earth. We also talked about the Rasha, which it's all he is this nefesh bahamit and barely has any control over himself, which we also talked about recently. And then we started talking about the Benoni starting in chapter 12, which is really the focus of the book, is the Benoni. When I say the focus of the book, what does that mean? So if you have one thing that's important, again, that a person who is actually Chabadnik, what they do, they have a certain, every day there's a certain amount of pages they read in Tanya. And over the course of a year, they've read all of Tanya. And it's over and over and over. So someone's been doing it 40, 50, 60 years, will have done Tanya hundreds of times. Maybe less, depending if they're, maybe more, maybe less, depending on the frequency that they do their cycle. But it's important for us, since we've only been going through this for about a year and a half now, to remind ourselves of something. What does it mean when I say that the goal of the book is the Benoni? So in the early days of Chassidut, we know that there was this concept, and still is, of Yechidut or Yechidus. It meant you'd spend private time with the Rebbe, whether it was Chabad or anybody, or a different Chatzer of Chassidut. And then it got to the point where there were just too many people coming to him. He couldn't handle it anymore. And he wrote this book for what he called Bnei Anash, Anshe Shlomenu, our people, meaning of his ilk, of the Chabad Chassidut. And he said, look, here's the goal. You're not going to be able to, he didn't say it exactly like this, but you're not going to be able to spend private time with me. Like in the past, it's just too many people. I just can't do it. But if you have this book and you have a teacher who can help teach you, I'm talking about a Chabad teacher, I'm not talking about Zev Shandalov, who can really get you into this, I'm giving you the tools for life. And who's the you? It's the Benoni. It's us, the 99% of the people, of the Jewish people, maybe 98% of the Jewish people. And that really began in chapter 12, when he starts telling us about the Benoni and that the struggle of the Benoni, the struggle against the Nefesh HaBahamit, the animalistic soul, is a good thing, because that's how we serve Hashem, to try to work against that Nefesh HaBahamit. That is not that, oh my gosh, we have this Nefesh HaBahamit. If only we didn't have it. That is what a Benoni does. It's the struggle. We learned that in chapter 12. In chapters 12 through 17, he broke down more points of the Nefesh HaBahamit, of the Benoni, and he also talked about two specific points. I'm just going to look at my notes. He talked about how the Benoni is who's able to rule over his machashava, dibur ma'aseh, his thought, speech, and action. And then he moved into the topic of bilvavacha, which we've done recently, which doesn't mean that the actual ma'aseh is done with this burning love, but rather it's an internal heart, is this ahava Hashem that is done through hitbonenut. That like he said, like the Rav said before in the video, I know I ought to do this. And that's enough to propel us the right direction. The bottom line is that until this point of this whole book, the Benoni must use his bina. Bina is intellect. It's his mind. To think about the greatness of Hashem, to give birth, as it were, to proper midot, character traits, in absolutely all areas of machshava, dibur, maaseh, thought, speech, and action, and bilvavacha. It happens in your heart. What does it mean? We saw just now, we just finished chapter 17, which is kind of the closing section of this chapter, this section, that the bilvavacha means that no is not going to be the burning heart, burning love of Hashem, but it's going to be this internal drive that I know what I'm supposed to do. And then once I kick it in and I do my mitzvot because of that, Hashem does the machashava tova and connects it, mitzaref l'maaseh. Okay. The introduction to chapter 18 is fairly straightforward. I want to show you first, let's once again look at the beginning of the book. Okay, first, we're going to start now chapter 18. It doesn't work unless I have a slide that says Tanya chapter 18. So now you know it is. Now, the Alter Rebbe did not haphazardly put information in certain chapters. I would imagine you could guess, based on that statement, that chapter 32, Lamed Bet, has a lot to do with the lev, with the heart. So too, chapter 18 begins a section about chai, about life, as a Benoni, but even from a different perspective of what we've done until now. But let's take a look at what I'm talking about. You'll notice in the Shar HaSefer, in the opening page, remember I highlighted this last week or 2 weeks ago, that the book is based on the words, Ki karov elecha davar me'od, leficha u'vavacha la'asoto. We already talked about that at length in this past chapter. Very good. Now he says, which I didn't read last time, Leva'er hetev, to clearly, very explicitly explain, Eich hu karov me'od, how is it easily or close to you to achieve? In two ways. The derech aruka, one was the long way, uktsara bezrat Hashem yitbarach, and also the short way. Now, I'm going to come back to this Ezrat Hashem yitbarach in a minute. So he tells us here that he has two approaches to teach us how this is in fact karov elecha hadavar me'od beficha. What we just finished at the end of chapter 17 was, believe it or not, the derech aruka, the long way. Now, there's another way. It's a shorter path. We're going to see what that means. But we have to also understand, when we first did this book, and I mentioned this last week or 2 weeks ago, that when it says the word Bezrat Hashem Yitbarach, it does not mean like we say, well, I'll be doing this Bezrat Hashem. It means that the only way the Derech Kitzara can be done is Bezrat Hashem Yitbarach, is with the help of God. It doesn't mean, well, Bezrat Hashem, I'm going to talk about it. It means I'm going to do it with the help of Hashem. And that you can achieve the Karov Elecha Hadavar Me'od in a derech tzara, in a shortcut, with Hashem's help, means that's the only way you can achieve it. So that's the basis of what's coming up. So let me tell you like a little spoiler at the beginning of this chapter. And this chapter, like I said, is the beginning of a section that will go span 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25. All those chapters, 8 chapters. The way I introduced chapter 17 was, give me a break. You know, he says it's karov elecha davar meod, so close to you and achievable. Said, no, it's not. He himself said, I don't have to turn back, just just take my word for it. When he himself says that she'en karov meod davar lehefech, he's psik, comma, he says just the opposite. And then he goes on to explain what it really does mean. But it still required us to do something. And what was that something? Hitbonenut. I had to focus. I had to concentrate. I had to do some introspection. Now, the average person may not even be able to do that. So if you're telling me in chapter 17 that in order to achieve the karov elecha meod, hadavar meod, etc., I have to at least do something. I have to do at least hitbonenut in my heart that will then, everything else will take place. What if I can't even do that? Are you telling me I'm a lost cause? That my Benoni status may not even be a Benoni, or maybe I'm Benoni, but I got to work at a different way. What does that even mean? So let's take a look at the beginning of chapter 18. And again, because I have certain things in red, that means I'm going to have a couple of slides on these things if we get to them. Okay, let me make this a little smaller. It's too big. Okay. And even to be more clear about the meaning of the word me'od, that appears in the pasuk that said that it, keeping Torah mitzvot, is exceedingly close to you. We need clarification. Let's just put it, it's not exactly what it means. We need to be a little bit more specific, and we have to make this all-encompassing. Because technically, chapter 17 does not apply to all Beinonim. Just think about yourself. Those who are now and those who will listen to this later, think about yourself. Do you really think that you have the capacity? I imagine you do, because you're in this class, but that the average person has the capacity to just stop and think just a little bit of God, about Hashem's grandiosity and all these things? Sometimes. On a consistent basis, maybe not. So he says like this, Ki af mi sheda'ato kitzara b'diat Hashem. Somebody even whose little means his mind is short when it comes to the idea of knowing God, which means he doesn't really grasp even the simplest thing. Ve'en lo lev lahavin b'gdulat ein sof baruch hu, nor does he have a heart who can start to begin to even contemplate the gedulah, the greatness of Hashem, the Ein Sof, the infinite. That he's able to conjure up some level of love, of fear, and some level of love. Afilu b'mocho utvunato levad, just in his mind, just in his imagination. Afal pikein karov elav hadavar meod. Still, nevertheless, it is karov to him, very close to him. Lishmor v'la'asod kol mitzvot haTorah v'talmud Torah keneged kulav, in a sense that he's able to still be able to somehow bring about this love, this ability to have his mind do something to enable him to have this karov elecha meod, to the point where it is mamash me'umka deliba be'emet. It's even from the depths of his heart, truthfully, be'emet lamito, b'dechilu u'chimu, and he still will be able to have the awe / fear and the love of God. How? This is a topic we talked about before. Now he's going to expand greatly over many chapters. It is this innate love that is in the heart of all Jews. Now, we've mentioned this before. What we didn't mention before was the mechanics of how does this work. We said that everyone has it, right? Everyone has it. And he talked about this early in the book and a little bit later. Now he's going to talk a little bit deeper about what this means, that even the person who is not able to conjure up these images briefly to do chapter 17, let's just say it briefly, he still has an option and an ability to be at a point of dechilu or chimu, of fear and love of Hashem, because of his ahava mesuteret, his innate love of Hashem, which is, now comes the kicker, shehi yerusha lanu me'avotenu. How do we have that? It is an inheritance from our forefathers, Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. It is in our Jewish DNA. You can't change your DNA. And because it's part of our DNA, because it's part of our Jewish DNA, we have the ability still, even though we may not be able to focus and concentrate for a little bit, and to try to conjure up some love of Hashem, and from there to take chapter 17 in its face and take it to the races. However, even though it's there, we got to understand the mechanics of this. It's nice to say that it's in our DNA. It's nice to say it's there. It's a good idea to say that every Jew has it. But Tachlis, what's the root of this? How does this work? And how is it a Yerusha? How is it even something that's a Torah? It's Torah shtit, that is genetic. That's a good word. And finally, how can you? I can understand the potential that the love of Hashem to be inherited, but the fear of Hashem, the awe. How is that a morasha or yerusha rather? How does that work even? So first, before we go any further, and we're not going to go further in the text, we're going to look at a couple of slides, at least one. Let's just kind of summarize what he said so far. He said, look, you're right. I'm right that in the last chapter I said, and I told you, what does it mean, karov me'od? I told you, look, a little hitbonenut, a little, just all you need is a little bit of thought, and that thought will allow you to awaken your heart, and your heart then does what it's going to do, and you do mitzvot even if you don't put your heart into it, even if you don't even think about when you're doing it. What motivated you was because you know Hashem's good, and you want to serve Hashem. Boom. It's you did it with all the kavanot, with all the intention, and everything was right, and Hashem kind of smoothed all the rough edges for you. But he says, wait a minute. There are people who just can't even do that. I do not want to sound racist. I guess that's not even the right word. But there's a very big difference. If any of you are Litvaks, you know the history of the Lithuanian Jewry, you will know that there's a very big difference in the emotions of the Litvish Jew and a non-Litvish Jew. Very different. I will tell you a very brief story. It's even just part of a story. There was a husband and wife that I needed to tell something to. Whatever, it was just a nice idea that I thought they would both appreciate. So I told the wife. She said, "Don't even bother telling my husband." I said, "Why not?" She says, "Because he's just a cold Litvak. He's not even going to care." So it doesn't mean that all Litvish Jews, Lithuanian Jews, are cold and don't have any emotion. It's not true. But as a stereotype, I will say, let's take the person who falls into the category of this woman's husband. Just cold. He doesn't have emotion when it comes to the service of Hashem. Again, please don't take me wrong. I'm not saying this is all true with all Litvaks. It's not the case. What about someone like that? Maybe it's not karov elecha davar meod beficha. Maybe it's not close to being achievable. He says, yes, it is. And what is it? We have a secret weapon. What's the secret weapon? Even for those people, the ahava mesuteret shebalev, this innate love that's in the heart of every Jew, and it comes in a yerusha. It's something that's been handed down to you from your parents and parents and parents and parents and back all the way to Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. And not only does it give you a yerusha of ahava, but it gives you yerusha of yirah, of awe and fear of Hashem. How that works, that's going to be part of this chapter and quite a bit more after that. What I want to do times it now. Okay, good. Let's take a look. Here, let's see, make this a little smaller. Okay. I'm going to go through one slide. I may do the second one or not yet. It's a little bit longer because it's a long thought process. Okay, let's start with this. This is going back to the beginning of the chapter again. If you remember, we said in his introduction that in the Shara Sefer in the book plate, it basically said Be'er Heitev, which comes from the beginning of Sefer Devarim, where Hashem tells Moshe to explain Be'er Heitev, to explain the Torah explicitly and very clearly, which understood to be maybe in the 70 languages. But in any case, he uses the same expression here, that he says, I still have to explain a little bit more, and I'm saying little in quotes, a little bit more about this me'od in the pasuk, ki karov elecha davar me'od. HaPasuk harei eino omer rak shekarov elecha davar. Pasuk doesn't just say it's achievable. Hu madgish, it stresses, shadavar karov me'od, that's exceedingly achievable. Hadgasha zo shel ha-me'od nir'et t'muah. This stressing of the idea that it's very achievable or attainable seems quite surprising. Yes, he has explained already how it's karov. But to be exceedingly karov, it sounds like a little bit far-fetched. He did tell us already, as we know in the prior chapter, that the mind rules the heart. And he used the expression also there that this is, and he said, any guy who's got a brain in his head knows how to do this. In this chapter, in this chapter, he's going to explain how it's exceedingly achievable. To everybody. Even someone who may not be able to do the hitbonenut. He can't even take the time to start contemplating Hashem. He just can't do it. So how did you contemplate? You need to start with your mind. But he doesn't even know how to do that. He has no clue or doesn't even want to. How is it easily achievable? How is it karov me'od? So he said that is going to be what he's going to explain in this chapter. Now, because the next slide is actually pretty long, where Rav Steinsaltz gives a nice overview of what the Alter Rebbe is not only going to say, but what his deeper meaning is. I want to wait to Bezrat Hashem till next week to do that. However, next week is the 20th. We will not be having class. It's the last day of school, and the teachers to have a end of school outing. So I won't be home till late. So Bezrat Hashem, we're looking at, I guess, the 27th. Let me just take a quick look. Let me stop the tape for this. Let me stop the recording.